Welcome back to video lecture number 6, voting. So this will be the end of the political process, and I hope you guys have enjoyed the ride, and I know you're anxious to get this over with, so let's get started with the topic of voting today. So flip to topics in this last lecture. Who can vote? What are the requirements to vote? Voter behavior. More about elections. Holding elections. Early voting? Criticism of campaigns. And finally, limits on money in elections. So there's a list of 8 things we're going to try to talk about, and I'm going to try to be efficient, unlike many of the other lectures, to get through this as quickly as possible so that you guys have more time to do the things that you like to do. What do you say? All right. So who can vote and the requirements for voting? Voting is a right, a fundamental right, and it is the way that most citizens, most people directly participate in our system of government. Yet in recent elections, fewer than 66% of eligible voters turned out to vote on election day. So that's 2/3 if you guys can't figure that percentage out. So less than 2/3 of the American public shows up on election day. Now that's a very odd thing, right? If, as you remember from the last lecture when we heard from Louis L'Amour, the author, he said, look, democracy requires participation. Yet more and more in the last 20, 30, 40 years, we see fewer and fewer people voting. That means they're not participating. So that sort of raises the question, why? Is that a problem? And I'll let you guys think about that. You can ask your parents. That's always a good thing to do. Stop the lecture. Ask your parents. I know that's a rather pesky thing. You're always bothering your parents with another civics or government question. But go ahead and ask them, is that a problem? And if it's not a presidential election year, voter turnout might hover in the mid 40% range. So what explains the fact that voting, although a sacred right, is one that Americans choose not to exercise? So let's look at several reasons. And Professor Fraga, who wrote your textbook, lists 4 reasons that really help us understand 4 reasons why American people are turning away from the polls. One is apathy. That is, apathy is a great word, lack of interest. And this is a really big problem. How do you motivate people who are essentially not motivated? They're unmotivated. They're apathetic. Big problem. Dissatisfaction with government. You can see the images to the right there, the unhappy face. A lot of citizens, especially lately in the last 10, 20, 30 years or more, don't trust the government. And they don't trust elected leaders, so they don't vote. And is this a problem? Dissatisfaction with government. Third, citizens believe that their vote, that is, one vote, will not really make a difference when so many votes are being cast. So some individuals think or reason, why bother to go to the trouble to register first to vote and then actually go out and vote on election day? So the idea that one vote doesn't really make a difference. That's also, I think, a very important reason to understand why people aren't voting. And fourth and last, the competitiveness of races, political races, has declined in the United States, in particular due to gerrymandering. And this really applies to races in the House, for the House of Representatives, moreover, and in some cases the Senate. Not so much the presidential races, but the idea that races really just aren't as competitive as they used to be due to gerrymandering. So some citizens feel, what's the point? Why bother when the outcome is already assumed? So who can vote or why people aren't voting is a really serious problem. And if you look at other nations that are democratic and hold elections regularly, we see that the United States is really below average in voter turnout and participation. So that being said, what are the requirements to vote? The rules and regulations for voting are left to individual states for the most part. However, Amendment number 26 to the Constitution, ratified in 1971, states that any person reaching the age of 18 may vote in federal elections, and that states may not prevent or bar people from exercising this right. So prior to this amendment, All states had set a minimum voting age at 21. And what changed in 1971 was the fact that many 18, 19, and 20-year-olds were fighting in Vietnam for their country and dying for their country, yet they could not vote in federal elections. Therefore, Congress passed a bill proposing the 26th Amendment. The states ratified it, and that became law again in 1971. So Amendment 26. So the voting age today is 18. You guys are, 3 to 4 years away from being able to exercise your fundamental right of voting, and that is participating. So hold on, you will in fact get there soon enough. So what else is required to vote? Well, one of the things that a person has to do is register with the state in which he or she resides, except in North Dakota. Interesting, I don't know exactly why, but you have to register. And the requirement to register prevents ineligible people from voting, that is, underage people, or people that aren't alive anymore. Can you imagine the corruption of people showing up and voting that aren't even alive? Ask me about that in class. Anyway, the topic of voter registration has become a high-profile, hot-button topic, as some states, believe it or not, some states today currently are increasing the requirements in order to register to vote. And the key issue here, and the key requirement, is an acceptable form of photo identification. And underline acceptable. Most adults in the United States hold a driver's license that bears a photo of them, and that's considered acceptable. Other adults or citizens hold passports, which also bear photos of them, and that is also acceptable. But what if a citizen has neither a driver's license or a passport? How can they register to vote? And that's a very serious question. And currently there's a campaign largely being pushed by Republicans to require acceptable forms of photo identification in order to be able to vote. There is such a law on the books in the state of Pennsylvania. Though it is being challenged, it is actually the law, and it will come into play this November. So to vote in Pennsylvania, you must have an acceptable form of photo ID. If you don't have it, guess what? You can't register to vote, therefore you can't vote. So Democrats are largely opposed to these voter registration laws because a disproportionate number of poor people and minorities do not have acceptable forms of photo ID. Therefore, they can't vote, and their fundamental right to participate is actually being denied. So that's a really big question for you guys to think about. Again, you might ask your parents about that too. All right, moving on to voter behavior. This topic really says, hey, what influences people when they go to the polls to vote? And that's a really good question, and political scientists have been trying to figure out how voters behave, though this will never be an exact science. Though the Fraga identifies 4 main factors that influence the way people vote, and they are as follows. Party identification. About 1/3 of all voters identify themselves as strong Democrats or Republicans, and they typically then vote their party. So if you're a strong Democrat, you vote Democrat. If you're a strong Republican, you vote Republican, no matter who the candidate is. A second thing that influences how people vote are the issues. Issues are important to voters, and the issues determine often how people will vote. So issues such as taxation, government spending, immigration, healthcare, national security and defense, the economy, abortion, same-sex marriages, the environment, the size of government, are all issues that we have seen in the last several election cycles, and they are issues that are likely to continue to attract the attention of American voters. And one party that adopts or believes in certain issues will attract the vote of some people, and vice versa. Other issues will attract the attention to the other party. So there is this idea about issues. Number 3, candidates themselves. Individual candidates have their own backgrounds, and sometimes voters really care a lot about the candidates, their age, their gender, their race, their integrity, their likability. Wow, likability, big one. And also maybe their record either in other elected offices, positions that is, or in business. Mitt Romney was the candidate for presidency for the Republicans, and he was a very successful businessman, and he made a big point of that when he was campaigning. I'm a very successful businessman. I know how to run businesses, therefore I can run the government and get the economy going. So sometimes people care a lot about a background. And then last but not least, there's the issue of the voter's own background. Every voter is a certain age, a certain race, a certain gender, has certain family beliefs, has certain educational levels, has certain religious beliefs, and occupies a certain economic status. And these factors about an individual voter will often also determine how she or he votes in an election. So voting is complex and never easy to predict, though lots of people are out there trying to predict how voters will behave. How are voters going to behave this November in the upcoming midterm elections? Many pundits, writers, and political scientists are predicting that the Republican Party will attract the attention and the support of a large number of American voters who are dissatisfied with President Obama, with the Democrats, with healthcare, with the state of the economy, and on and on. So, but voter behavior is difficult to pin down. And I would add a fifth category, and that's frustration with the status quo. Sometimes American voters punish the party in power. Currently, the Democrats control the White House and the Senate. If people feel that the Democrats are not doing a good job, they will then typically vote for Republicans to punish the Democrats and replace the Democrats. If the Republicans are not doing a good job, if they are in power, as was the case back in 2006 and 2008, the American voters will punish the Republicans, as they did. So this is sort of back and forth frustration with the status quo. Okay, and you can see there some pictures. Which way will you choose? You can see Obama and Romney squaring off, and then you can say, don't know who to vote for? Why not this guy? Interesting. All right, let's move on then to our last couple topics, more about elections. We've already discussed primary elections in a previous lecture, but there are also general elections, and those are the elections that are held at the end of political campaigns. That is, after the primary elections have narrowed the field down to one candidate from each party. At times, there is also an independent candidate, especially in presidential elections. So the general election is in November after the primary election, and the candidate who gets the most votes wins. So it's very simple. In the American political system, there is no second place. In European or parliamentary systems, second, third, and fourth, and fifth, and sixth place finishes are often rewarded with seats in the parliament and a position in the government. Not so in the United States. You either win or you go home. And so that's often called first past the post, using a horse race analogy. So the horse that is first past the post, that is the finish line, wins, right? And that's the way it is in our political system. So general elections are usually held in November, and I'll talk more about that. There are also special elections, and these are held either at the state or local level to let voters, rather than elected officials, make decisions about taxation or specific policies, etc., or to replace an elected official who resigned or died while in office. Oh boy. So let's go on to the idea of holding elections. The date of general elections are set by law now. So general federal elections take place the Tuesday following the first Monday of November. Very simple. So the first Monday of November, the next Tuesday, the Tuesday following is the date of federal elections. And federal elections happen on even-numbered years. This year is 2014, an even-numbered year. It's not a presidential election, so it's called a midterm. That is between the term of the president. That's how we measure elections. So on election day, voters go to polling places near their home, and all citizens live in voting districts called precincts, and you can see a voting place there set up. Voters cast their vote, called a ballot, and this is done in secret. And casting a vote today usually involves some sort of machine, mechanical or electronic, though on occasion, paper ballots, which you see below, are still used. Electronic machines, and I agree, cause concern because there's no paper trail, and some people feel that they may be inaccurate. There's also something that has become quite popular today, and that's called early voting. And some 30 states allow voters to vote early, that is up to 45 days prior to the general election. There's also something called an absentee ballot when you can't make it to the polls, and you can apply for this special ballot. So that's really all the time we have today. Thank you very much for your participation.